It is Locked On Jazz for the 27th of September. Content day. What an absolute pleasure. I'll give you a quick breakdown on the guys. And then camp opens today with really fascinating storylines. Like who starts, who plays, who gets cut, or more detailed, who passes and who defends. We're talking about it all coming up on today's edition of Locked On Jazz. Pow.
You are Locked On Jazz, your daily podcast on the Utah Jazz. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
How are you? I'm David Locke, radio voice of the Utah Jazz, Jazz NBA insider. This is Locked On Jazz, your daily podcast on the Utah Jazz, giving you insight, expertise, geeky numbers, and hopefully making it way better to be a Jazz fan each and every day. Thank you so very much for making Locked On Jazz your first listen of the day. Please, 5 stars, comment, thumbs up on YouTube. Our YouTube question of the day is, what do you think the Jazz starting lineup will be when they open the season against the Denver Nuggets? I don't know. Nathan Harker, Jazz pregame producer, and I were playing around with it the other day and didn't necessarily come up with it. So that's our YouTube question of the day. Who do you think the Jazz starting 5 will be? Put those in the comment section for us today. So yesterday was content day, and it was absolutely outstanding. And I'll tell you, these guys are just great. Like, they've given up a huge amount of their lives. They bypass things along the way because they love the game and because they have an opportunity to make generational changing money and hopefully get to play the game they love. And in the midst of it, whatever we're doing with these kids, for all the criticism of AAU, for all the criticism of all these other things, I saw the opposite yesterday. I saw a bunch of well-spoken, thoughtful, really thoughtful young men who love the game, want to perform, want to do well, and enjoyed talking about it. It was really long. We started at 7 and finished at 4:30, but it was really exciting. Unquestionably, the storyline that comes out of Content Day from a team standpoint was all of them talking about the fact that they have a chip on their shoulder, that everyone's talking about how they don't have a chance, that there's some talent here. Colin Sexton's good, Mike Conley's good, Malik Beasley's good, Lauri Markkanen's good. Like, these guys are a little insulted of the way they're being talked about. Now, every top 100 ranking in the world that's being put out right now, Locked On's top 50 that moved the line, we don't have one of those players. And so, maybe it is going to be a case where we're in every game until late, and then it's going to be a question of whether Colin Sexton can make enough plays late in the ball game, or somebody can come through in the clutch like that to make enough plays, which is something that probably hasn't been established out of these guys yet at this point in time in their career. And that's where that's how you vault yourself into those kind of rankings, is that you find an ability to make plays late. And Sexton hasn't really had that chance because of the fact that he was on a not very good Cleveland team, and maybe we'll see whether he's got that next step in his game. So that's, I think, that's the number one takeaway. To me, the number one takeaway was how wonderful all these guys were and how thoughtful they were. Stanley Johnson was super thoughtful about the fact that he'd gone from being, some coach had finally said to him, Stanley, you got to find the things you excel at in the league and make those even better. Where's the area where you're a notch better than everyone else, and accentuate those rather than trying to fix all your problems? It's interesting because I do believe that. I think the progression you see out of an NBA player is that year 1 they get in the league and there's a bunch of things they don't do well. And then year 2 they get in the league and they try to fix all the things they don't do well and they still don't do them well. And then year 3 they say, okay, well, I can do these things well, and they accentuate those things and they get better at those things. And that's why you get the year 2 to year 3 jump out of players. So they were delightful. Walker Kessler for the win. Walker Kessler was the last guy we saw at 4:15 in the afternoon. Our group, which was the broadcast group, was pretty punch drunk at that point. And he came in and just was hysterical He was funny. He was more than just funny. He was witty. He was self-deprecating. He was thoughtful. He got into it with Thurl in the middle of the room on how you block shots, both right-handed and left-handed, on how you lure people into spots. We'll see if it works in the NBA. He doesn't have that experience yet. So really an interesting kind of to hear him talk about this and break down what his career, like how he used shot blocking, how intellectual he is, how game film, like the key to shot blocking to him happens long before the game starts. It has to do with all your film study beforehand. And that was really interesting to hear out of a young player who was very mature, who's interesting to me. These guys sell a good game too, right? They all talk about it. You listen to them and you're going to believe that all of them are going to be pretty good. And Walker Kessler's interesting because he grew up in a basketball family. His uncle played in the NBA. His dad played at Georgia. His brother played at Georgia. His grandfather played. And so from a very young age, he knew he was going to be playing. And so he's been trained I thought this was really interesting. He said, from a very young age, I've been trained with the ball in my hand and making plays, whereas the past generation guys would go work on post-ups and things. But with the game, he's young enough that the game's been changing throughout his development. So he's been developing all these other skills. We'll see whether he has them or not. Colin Sexton was absolutely delightful. He just comes with a great energy and a little bit of pizzazz to him, almost a boyish grin, but he was completely delightful. He is, by the way, speaking of clutch, he's had huge clutch experience in his opening 3 years of his career. He's been great at it. He shot 53% from three in the clutch over the first three. Well, last year he got a little bit of time. 3 years of his career. Last year he played like 5 clutch games. His 2-point shooting has not been very good in the clutch, and his free throw shooting has only been okay. He's a 75% free throw shooter. His assist to turnover ratio is 1-to-1 in that circumstance. And his 2-point shooting, he shoots 42% overall and 53% from three. So, one thing to just, if you're interested in that, I mentioned like can Colin Sexton do things in the clutch? That's going to be another stage for him as a development of a player, is that his next stage in this is the fact that he needs to become a better late game clutch player. His 2-point shoot, and that's probably 2-point shooting, unless it's all going to be off the bounce threes, which I think is going to be an interesting kind of, where the game's going. But he shot 38% on twos. But he was delightful. We'll see with the ball in his hands. He's got to be excited for the opportunity of where he's going. He talked about it. He was borderline all-star a few years before, and now has this opportunity. Mike Conley was, seeing Mike Conley and Jordan Clarkson was just wonderful. Jordan's just the coolest dude on the planet. He's just the coolest dude on the planet. He's just figured himself out. He just was crazy busy this offseason with everything he was doing. And, he often goes off the grid for a few weeks. I asked him if he got a chance to do that, and he didn't. He just was at, Milan and then New York and doing the various fashion work and playing in Philippines, playing for the Filipino national team, which was such an interesting thing to hear him talk about, the Philippines national team, to hear him talk about and the honor that was. So Jordan's just, you're in the room with Jordan, and he's just frankly the coolest dude on the planet. Mike's just the most thoughtful, real guy. He's talking about the family being settled, and they love it in Utah. And obviously if he gets traded, they have to talk. It's a tough time for like Jordan and Mike to try to figure out what's going on. They're reading all the things. It's funny little stories here. Alan Horton of the Minnesota Timberwolves. I've been talking with him about Vanderbilt and Beasley and Balmero and who these guys are. And he texted me the other day. He says, one thing about Malik Beasley is he'll come and fist tap every single guy in the plane before you take off every day. It's just who he is. Sure enough, he walks in the room yesterday. He walks to each person, boom, 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 fist taps them, says hello. It's amazing also, by the way, like these are kids. They're very young. They're super polite. They're going, we were in a room and they walk into the room. There's someone handling them, taking them from spot to spot. And our whole broadcast crew is there. So talent-wise, it's Thurl and Bowler and Holly and myself and Ron. And then it's also Alema and Mike Smith. And that's also Nathan Harker, our pregame producer for TV, Jeremy Brunner, and Travis Henderson, our producer and directors for TV, all in the room there as well. And then there's a makeup person there for some of the TV shoots and too few camera people. And it was really interesting how many, only one or two guys just kind of walked in right to their seat. Every other person walks by, shakes hands, says hello, how you doing, introduces themselves. Just really, it was kind of I don't know. It was Jared Vanderbilt afterwards, sat around. We talked about his injuries and how he got through his injuries. The way we did it is Holly got a few minutes, then I got a few. Holly did some basketball stuff with them and their off season and their goals and things, and then I did some kind of personal get to know stuff, and then we sat down as a group with them. Jared Vanderbilt was just super. Kind of talking about just his injury run and this, and he's from a family of players, but he was the one that was taller. The one that I'll tell you that was most interesting to me, and always is, I always ask about birth order. And the birth order is almost universally that they're the youngest. Almost none of them are the oldest. So it was one yesterday I think was the oldest in his family. But when they start talking about birth order, whether they're the youngest of three and their two sisters, whatever it might be, each and every time, that's the consistent thread, is that they're always the one who's the youngest in the group. Today's show, storylines for camp next. All right, so we'll get to that. Storylines for camp. I think it's fascinating. This is going to be an incredible training camp, an incredible next 2 weeks to watch how this plays out. Not because of trades anymore, but now because of what's on the court. And I think it comes down, there's two big picture questions that are unanswered, but I think it comes down to two little picture questions to get those answers. We'll talk about that as we continue. Today's show is brought to you by Murdoch Chevy, located in Woods Cross, also in Logan, and the Chevy lineup is just incredible right now. This is the time of year that if you're looking to go get the truck for the winter, you can do it at Murdoch Chevy. They've got the two amazing trucks, the Colorado as well as the Silverado. $500 customer cash back and $1,000 access credit on purchase of any new Silverado. It is truck season. The Colorado is the smaller, zippier, kind of move around truck. The Silverado is what I like to call the lazy boy of trucks. It's not how they market it, but I'm telling you, it is the coolest ride out there. When we had one, you were just feeling like you were above the world, chilling out in a lazy boy chair while you're just cruising up and down the roads on the most comfortable of rides. And the 2022 Colorado is just sporty. They've souped it up a little bit. It used to be kind of a basic. It is now souped up, some nice curves to it. Looks really awesome. The SUV lineup of Chevy, also remarkable, with the Tahoe and the Suburban that you know so well, but the Trailblazer, the Blazer, the Traverse, the Equinox, and then the Mini Trax, all available for you. If you're going to head on over to Murdoch Chevy, either in Woods Cross or in Logan, please email me first at dlock09@gmail.com. We'll make sure we get you taken care of. Today's show is also brought to you by our friends over at betonline.net. BetOnline for your odds, news, and scores. All out there. NFL action every single week at BetOnline. Get the latest odds. The Thursday night game this week, the red-hot Miami Dolphins against the Cincinnati Bengals, but the Bengals are favored by 3.5, despite the Dolphins win over the Bills. I always tell you who the survivor pool pick is of the week, and the odd line survivor pool of the week is 6.5 for the Philadelphia Eagles at home against Jacksonville, who frankly might be good if we're not totally certain on that. NBA odds. By the way, our first preseason game is Tuesday, October 18th, the 76ers and the Celtics. Oh, no, that's the regular season. They have lines out for the regular season. Celtics by 4 and the Warriors by 6. Championship odds. It's going to be interesting to watch. The Warriors are the favorite right now at plus 575. These are pretty interesting. No one's really the favorite here. 600 the Celtics, Bucks at 700, Nets at 750, Clippers at 750, with a hard drop to the Suns at 1,200. It is going to be quite the season. That's all available for you at betonline.net. All right, storylines of camp. Who's going to pass? If you go to B-Ball Index, which I think is a really great site, and B-Ball Index is a site in which they do these great player profiles, and they break it down into various skills, and we'll break down each of our players as we get a little closer and we know who everybody is and all those things sometime. But if you take a look at our players here, and there's a universal theme on all of our players, and that is that they don't pass. Will Hardy's going to want these guys to have ball movement, and I think that's the first story of training camp, is who's willing to pass. So when you look at these guys, and start breaking them down, and you look at their B-ball index ranking, the rankings for their passing, frankly, is pretty brutal on every single one of them. Colin Sexton, here's how they judge playmaking, like role-adjusted assist points per 75 possessions. So this is Sexton. This isn't fair. This is Sexton last year, and that was kind of a brutal year for him. So let me go to 2021. But if you go to 2021 for Sexton, so this is his good year, and you go to, they have a note that calls role-adjusted assist points per 75 possessions on the court. So in other words, how many assists do you get? He gets a D. He gets a D minus. If you look at his cleaning the glass numbers at one point in time, he was in like the 4th percentile of assist to usage. Okay, so Sexton's not a natural passer. His playmaking ability is super high. His finishing talent's pretty good. He's a great scorer, but just naturally, that he's not a passer. You look at Malik Beasley, same thing. If you look at Malik Beasley's career, and now, frankly, this is what's interesting here, is that this is also a little bit of what the game has asked them to do. In other words, Malik Beasley's asked to be a dead-eye shooter and play that. But his assist, his passing efficiency, his passing creator volume, his passing versatility, they're in the D's. They're not a passer. Lauri Markkanen, again, a little bit of what the league has asked him to do. He gets some posts up, single coverage. He's supposed to go to work. But again, same thing on him. Assist rate per 75 possessions is an F. Potential assists for 100 passes is an F. Passing creation volume is an F. Passing efficiency is an F. And some of this, in fairness to the guys, is what they're asked to do. Now, what's super interesting here is the latest acquisition in Kelly Olynyk is a fabulous passer. And to some extent, when Mike Conley's not on the floor, he might be our point guard. Because you look at his assist points per 75 possessions, it's an A minus. His role adjusted is an A. His overall playmaking talent's an A. His passing efficiency and passing versatility is an A minus. Jared Vanderbilt is not a passer. He's not a playmaker. That's not somewhere that he's been at this point in his career. So the first thing that's so interesting to me about where this roster is right now is who. It sounds so basic and simple, but I actually think the coaching staff really has to put this together, and that is who's going to pass. It's so unclear, what our rotations are, who's going to be, what they're going to do, all those kind of things. Jared Butler, frankly, is not a natural passing point guard either. I think it'll be interesting. I think he and one other guy that I'm going to mention later, I think have a massive opportunity this year. Butler's rankings are pretty good on his passing efficiency, and he did a nice job late in the year. So he's actually an AA minus point guard. Mike Conley obviously is a natural passer who looks excited to be kind of back in the realm of being a point guard. But you look at this, Clarkson's not a passer. So you run through this list, it's pretty you guys can do it too. Sexton's not a natural passer. Markkanen's not a natural passer. Vanderbilt's not a natural passer. Beasley's not a natural passer. Nickeil Alexander-Walker hasn't been a natural passer. Clarkson's not a natural passer. I can't imagine that Agbaji is a natural passer as a rookie. Stanley Johnson's not. Walker Kessler, Doak, Zeller, Kelly Olynyk, and Mike Conley, to me, are the guys that are natural passers. Maybe Jared Vanderbilt. And I think how does Fontecchio and Balmero, who both move it, fit into this is really, really interesting to me. Who's going to pass on this roster? And then part two of that, because these are the characteristics. When Will already talked about the team, it's going to be playing hard, it's going to be tough, it's going to be together, and it's going to run. To run and be together, you got to pass. To be tough, the others are to defend. That's basically what he's saying. So who's the defensive players? Mike actually defends pretty hard. He's just small. Sexton has not had a reputation of being a defensive player at this point in his career. Again, these guys are all developing. They're not formed prospects yet. Or excuse me, they're still prospects. They're not formed players yet. So the fact that up to this point in their career, they haven't done something doesn't mean they can't. It just means they haven't, which makes this to me really fascinating. And the next part of this is who's going to make the team, who's going to get cut. So who's going to be willing to give of themselves in a training camp where they're trying to prove that they make the team is pretty fascinating. So who's going to defend, right? So Mike will defend and play hard and do all the things you're supposed to do because he's Mike. He just happens to be small and 34 years old. Who's going to... Clarkson's not a natural defender. Beasley's never been a natural defender. Markkanen's never been a natural defender. Olynyk's not a natural defender. Jared Butler, I was talking to him, they really asked Jared Butler to defend last year. In camp. That's what they were asking him to do is to work on his defense at a really high level in training camp this year. So then the question to me is, like, what happens if Sabian Lee comes out and really defends? Nickeil Alexander-Walker's not been a natural defender. I'm not sure Balmero is physically at a stage. He was delightful, by the way. Taylor Horton-Tucker with his super long arms is probably a good, opportunity to suddenly make a little name for himself with his defensive prowess. So to me, that's the next step of this that's so interesting is who's going to be willing to defend in the game. And those two things, I think we're going to look for scoring and big nights, but I'm going to watch it who's defending and who's passing because I think that's going to lead to the two bigger picture topics that we'll touch on here in a second, which is who's going to start and who's going to get cut as we continue. Thanks very much for making Locked On Jazz your first listen of the day. It's Locked On Jazz, your daily podcast on the Utah Jazz. It's your team every day. For your second listen, Locked On NBA Big Board. Great episode yesterday by Rafael Barlow on the top 10, 12 prospects and the skills they need to develop this season. And he made a fascinating point in that show about the fact that last year at this time, there were a bunch of kids that were major prospects that end up kind of falling out of the top 10. So there's still a lot to develop from a draft standpoint. That's Locked On NBA Big Board. So who starts? That's the question I asked you today in YouTube. Who is your starting five? I played with Nathan Harker on this the other day, or yesterday, who's our producer. All right, so Conley and Sexton and Markkanen, to me, I think have to start. Now, it's interesting. Colin and Sexton and Mike Conley really shouldn't start together. That's 2 6'1" guards. We've seen that. But I don't think it's appropriate to ask Mike Conley to come off the bench. Maybe. I mean, Mike's such a stud that he's probably and a team player that he'd be willing to do it. He actually even went to Quinn, I think, at one point a few years ago and kind of was like, do I need to come off the bench for this team? So I think Mike, he would, I'm not saying Mike wouldn't do it. I think he's an important leader on this roster as it's constructed. And frankly, if the Jazz move Mike Conley and move Jordan Clarkson, as many are suspecting, then some of the starting lineup stuff gets a lot easier because then Sexton slides to the 1, Beasley slides to the 2. You're just filling in the 3, the 4, and the 5. But the 4-5 is super interesting. So if you decide, as I think Markkanen is probably our second or third best player, so Markkanen is going to start. Now, who do you play Markkanen and Oleynik together? Not great defensively. Probably doesn't move super well. Markkanen's really big, by the way, in person. Really, really big. And long. And so he can probably cover up some of the defensive stuff that you wouldn't get otherwise, but that's not a great, right? Oleynik and Markkanen is not a great defensive lineup, and one of the things this team really wants to do. So you're suddenly starting Sexton and Conley at 6'1" with Markkanen and Oleynik. I don't know how you do that. And then who's your 3 that's in there? But if you don't start Oleynik, who's passing, right? We just talked about that there aren't that many guys that naturally move the ball. If you were to start Conley, Sexton, Beasley, Markkanen, and Vanderbilt as your center, you only have one ball mover in there. Now, Sexton maybe develops into another ball mover and a creator that moves the ball. But he's going to have to really, that's one of the questions, like who's going to pass? Who's going to defend? Is Vanderbilt big enough to be able to play the 5? Is Walker Kessler ready enough the way Robert Williams was, the Time Lord, in Boston to play early in his career, the way that Mitchell Robinson was in New York? And can he slide in, and is he better off playing with better players? And you're starting. Is Abaji long enough and athletic enough that you're sliding him into 3 and you're bringing Clarkson and Beasley off the bench? Are you staggering minutes between Sexton and Conley? And I would think that they might start together, then Conley goes out, Sexton stays in, then Conley circles back, and maybe you close with him, but that one of the 2 of those is always on the floor at all times. It's really fascinating on who starts. And in the comment section, have them there with different viewpoints. I don't have a starting five. I mean, it's easy. Again, like if I'm just taking Conley out of it, then it's Sexton, Beasley, maybe Abaji. But the Markin and Olynyk thing's really funky. Or do you go Markin at the 3, Vanderbilt at the 4, and Kessler at the 5, and now you don't space the floor at all with those two, but you're big, right? You're kind of going the Cleveland model. Cody Zeller, I don't think on a training camp roster or on a training camp contract is make good contract is guy who ends up starting, but I actually wouldn't be surprised if Cody Zeller didn't start for us at some point in time during the season. I think that's probably... I think that's probably a high likelihood that if he makes the roster, he actually would end up starting a game. He's that good a player. So the starting lineup to me is wild. But the next part that's even more wild is who makes the team. And trying to figure out, like, a lot of hybrid position guys. So obviously you have Conley and Sexton. And then you have Beasley. I think I'm going to slide Beasley to 3 for this conversation. And then you have Clarkson as the guards. You have Markkanen, Olynyk, Kessler. Fontecchio's going to make the team at a 3. We've signed him to a contract. And then, so that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 spots. You've got 7 more spots. And it's easy to say, well, Jared Butler's going to make the team. Okay, I would assume that Jared Butler makes the team. I think he's got a real chance. I think Nickeil Alexander-Walker has a real chance as well. I think both these guys those are two guys that I think have incredible chances to kind of make a name for themselves and do on this roster as it's constructed right now. That Jared Butler, his offensive skills, what I saw out of Butler last year is while there was a lot to be desired on a young roster and a young team, is I saw a guy who really had some pretty incredible offensive skills. And is able to, was able to show those at a super high level. But you know what? On the other end, like as good as Jared Butler's offensive skills are, and I'm impressed. Do we know that Sabian Lee is actually not a better player, right? Like I know that sounds really weird because Jared Butler's our guy, but if you start to like go player comparison and head-to-head on these two guys, or not head-to-head, but just like player comparison, they're not dramatically different. Frankly, Jared Butler was drafted 40th in the draft. Sabian Lee was drafted kind of at an equal spot. They both came out of big-time programs. Sabian Lee's got an extra year experience, but if you look at their shooting in one limited season for Butler, 360 minutes, Sabian Lee's played 1,300 minutes in 2 years, so he's got far more experience. He's shooting 43%. Butler's shooting 40%. Butler's shooting 32% from 3. Lee is shooting 27%. Neither of them, frankly, have shot it well, and that's going to be development. But, defensively, Sabian Lee is thought of being a long, I think he's got like almost a 7-foot wingspan. His dad, Amp Lee, was a running back at Florida State. He's an elite athlete, but he's 6'2", 183, and has played 85 games in the NBA, averaging about 16 minutes a game. And Jared Butler, who we all love because he's our guy, and by the way, Sabian Lee, I believe, from just if you're thinking about a draft prospect, was the 38th pick of a draft, and Jared Butler was the 40th pick of a draft. So they're very, very similar players. And my instinct is exactly as yours that, well, of course, Jared Butler makes a team. He was our draft pick. Well, okay, and Justin Zanuck was still the one who drafted him. So that seems logical, but I don't know that. Like, is there a chance that Sabian Lee's defense is that much better than Jared Butler's? That Sabian Lee makes the team. I think that's an interest, to me. Like, what about Nickeil Alexander-Walker? Do we know for a fact that Nickeil Alexander-Walker makes his team? Former first-round draft pick? You would think so. And I actually think Nickeil Alexander-Walker has an amazing opportunity here with a little, just kind of get his feet, get his bearings after being bounced around a little bit. He started 35 games in the NBA already in his career. That whole last season was a mess with Willie Green. He talked a lot about he just got uncomfortable, got inside his own head, spiraled down a little bit, and then came to Utah, never got his bearings. We were too good a team. But this is a guy that was really inefficient but can really score at a former 17th pick of a draft. And where does he fit into this mix? I think that's interesting. Balmero's an interesting one. Like, I really like the way Balmero plays, and at 6'6", 200, he's got good length and he's a ball mover, but he frankly shot 31% from the field last year and 28% from three. I also think COVID plays a huge part in this. A lot of these guys just didn't have a natural getting ready for the season in their time. So I think this is going to be incredible to watch. We're not going to necessarily know what happens behind closed doors in practice, but when they get on the floor in Edmonton, guy has a good game and suddenly gets more time in Portland, and then has a week of training camp, and then we come back and play San Antonio and Dallas in our preseason games. The roster could be changing. Guys could get moved, but roster could be changing. And, does Stanley Johnson find a way to make this team? He's probably got an uphill battle, but you know what? Talking to him yesterday, that's a former number 9th pick of an NBA draft who's trying to figure it out, who can do unique things on the floor. Does Doak get healthy enough to make this team? Like, I think he's battling for a roster spot as well. If Cody Zeller's ready to go, which he, probably is, or you still trying to develop Doak. Like, I think it's fascinating to see where this goes. And my point of this is that I think, and I'm not trying to overplay it, and I don't want to cause anybody's family distress because I might be overstating it, but I know Conley's making the team if he's not traded. I know Sexton's making the team. I know Clarkson's making the team. I know Beasley's making the team. I know Fontecchio's making the team. He signed for 2 years. I know Markkanen's making the team. I know Olynyk's making the team. I know Kessler's making the team. That's 8. I'd presume Jared Butler and Nickeil Alexander-Walker, Sabian Lee have a chance. At Balmero, Taylor Horton-Tucker, seems like they should. Abaji's making the team. I know Abaji's making the team. Okay, so add that to the list. That's 9. I think the other 6 spots, and I know Vanderbilt's making the team, so I've missed a few in there. I think the other spots are wide open. I think we have five roster spots that are just wide open right now. And that is making for an incredibly interesting training camp and probably a hard-fought one. All right, have a great one. That is Locked On Jazz. Thanks very much for making Locked On Jazz your first listen of the day. Locked On NBA Big Board, your second listen, plus incredible content at Locked On NFL on YouTube. Have a great one.